But yeah, as we're past 11, we might as well make a start. So yeah, as I say, we'll go on to the main topic shortly, but we'll start off with a couple of brief introductions, run through the main topic, and also we'll have some time at the end as well. If anyone's got any questions that they want to sort of put forwards to us, we can do our best to answer those as well whilst we're on the call. There will be a few links and things dropped into the chat pane as well from my colleague Joe, so look out for those. There'll be links to download our book and those sorts of things, so they'll pop in there soon. But yeah, just to get started with then, I suppose, brief introduction to myself. I'm Jacob, good to see you all. I'm Head of Sales here at Prodo. And us as an agency, we've specialised in digital transformation, essentially for those of you who don't know us already, in the housing sector for over 20 years with over 100 clients. And our offering is very much kind of broken down into 4 core streams, which is essentially strategic digital transformational consultancy and sort of help with that roadmap planning. We have a suite of digital products as well around self-service, so the app and the web-based portal. We do lots of web design, web development, and then the ongoing sort of supporting and hosting and sort of innovation around those as well. But yeah, hopefully some familiar logos on the screen for you guys as well, of those who are working with it at the moment. And today we're joined by Paul Herndon, who's Managing Director of Fulius. And if you give a quick intro to yourself and Fulius, Paul.
Yeah, sure. So I've been part of the Prodo and Fulius group now for about 10 years. Worked with many of the client logos on the screen at the moment. My specialism over at Fulius is with CRM and sort of engagement platforms, notably HubSpot. I was actually at the housing event with Jake last week and sort of recognised a few faces on the screen here today, where we were speaking about effective tenants engagement and communications via systems such as HubSpot. So looking forward to today.
Great stuff. Cheers, Paul. Thanks for that. But yeah, I suppose one of the core benefits of us working together as that sort of group is that we've got the background of social housing, like you say, even yourself, of 10 plus years, but also those outside of sector clients helping us sort of understand and innovate with and bring those things sort of into the space as well, I suppose, from a CRM point of view, particularly for you guys as well. But yeah, just before we get into the main element of this, certain parts of these webinars and sort of the content and things that we put forward and very much sort of around how our offering is positioned as well is driven by research. And some of you should have a copy of this already. We've kind of tried to sort of pepper it across the space, across events and meetings that we've had. But if you don't, you can download a copy of our book, which is research-based. We did some surveying into the sector a couple of years ago and produced a book on channel shift in the housing space, but generally digital transformation as a whole. So if anyone wants to have a read of that and give us any feedback, as we are in the process of planning the second iteration as well, feel free to do so.
I almost think as well, slight tangent, but with this book, I remember when we actually designed this, and I don't think what you can tell from that book is that all of the houses were sort of individually made with cards and folded up, and a scene was made and photographed and whatnot. I know it's not necessarily on topic, but it's quite impressive.
It is. I remember seeing those little houses knocking about the office for a while.
Yeah.
Okay, so onto today's main sort of topic then, I suppose, which is all focused on enhancing that tenant engagement through digital. Now, I know lots of you sort of try to approach this in various different ways, and there's obviously certain elements of tenant engagement which does need to be offline in certain scenarios, but there's definitely efficiencies to be had and benefits to focusing on certain routes of digital engagement as well. Particularly we find, and we'll come on to the common challenges that we hear about in the space shortly, but we tend to find and hear lots of challenge around data segmentation. And that's obviously a big part of the success of engagement through digital in particular, and obviously offline channels as well. But the other elements to this we're going to focus on is streamlining internal, but also those external processes with the likes of automation as well. The personalisation of content, of personalisation of outreach, communications, service delivery, and sort of engagement as a whole, and what that means for the data management moving forwards of being able to gain insights from interactions and sort of different customer groups and things, which kind of feeds into that data segmentation piece as well. So they're the sort of the 4 brackets that we'll cover today, and start with, I suppose, the importance of it. So I suppose when it comes to the potential benefits of digital tenant engagement, they're all essentially sort of tied in with one another, really, aren't they, in terms of the challenges and things that we hear, which we'll come on to in a second. But in essence, an increased digital sort of approach, I suppose, to tenant engagement is something which is can benefit satisfaction, which we know is obviously an important part of everything you guys are doing at the moment. Obviously, people publishing their TSMs and things at the moment. Engagement, which is positioned in a way which is personalised, is a way of ensuring that customers feel heard and listened to, and that their situation is understood, and therefore, hopefully, you have the information that you need to service those people in the right way, obviously leading to an increase in satisfaction at that point. It feeds into that community building element as well, so engagement across the board fosters that sense of community, leading to hopefully a nicer living environment for everyone. But it also means that you can also sort of work towards more proactive management as well, because those tenants who are engaged, and you will always have that sort of bucket of people who won't engage, they just want to live in a home and sort of be left alone. But those people who are engaged can sort of help not only position certain elements around service delivery, but they're probably more likely to get in touch with issues a little bit earlier as well, rather than sort of letting them sit there and report things all in one go. Which feeds into an enhancement of trust. So that regular communication, engagement, and the trust building between the customer and the housing association is something we hear quite a lot, that word trust, in the workshops that we run, particularly with tenants. They often feel that certain inquiries just sort of get raised and not sure where they're up to, and that sort of trust breaks down a little bit. So sort of obviously engagement feeds into that. And consumer regs as well. So obviously you'll be working towards at the moment, understanding customers more, gaining as much data as you can on customer preference, listening to them, ensuring customer voice is heard when you're sort of planning project delivery, and then having to, I suppose, demonstrate that you've done that to the regulator and those sorts of things as well. So just quickly touch upon the importance of it, I guess. But yeah, from a perspective of common challenges that we hear, in terms of working towards these things around personalisation of communications and service delivery, we quite often hear, and this kind of feeds into your talk a little bit, Paul, at the event, really, that legacy systems kind of hinder this quite significantly. There's often data in disparate systems which make that sort of insight generation quite difficult. So in your talk, you talked about the dinosaur, I think, is how you define certain elements of it.
Yeah, I think sort of over the 10 years I've been here, we've seen a sort of journey of, when I first started working with social housing, everything was sort of housing management system, and the housing management system did everything. Well, when I say everything, it did a very limited scope, but that was everything. And then I think we saw probably a shift to dynamics. Probably, if I split these into 4 sort of 2.5 year stints, we saw a big, Capita and whoever sort of dominating there. Then we saw a bit of a sort of breakout of dynamics where HAs looked to implement dynamics because there was a belief that it would sort of provide that flexibility, provide that single source of truth, provide that ability to communicate to customers, to residents, to tenants based on every piece of data that is held about an individual. And I think that sort of didn't go that well from a dynamics perspective. I know it's had a resurgence recently, but I think there was a sort of no awareness from Microsoft as to what the housing sector needed. I think there was a lack of awareness from Microsoft consultants as to what the housing sector needed. And as such, the amount of people that brought dynamics in and reversed out of it is astonishing. Then I think we saw a bit of a kickback from the sort of legacy housing management system providers, and they brought out almost shinier versions of what existed and version 2s of what existed and badged them up as CX and, these different variants of the product that already existed. And I think the last 2.5 year stints, we've definitely seen a rise of more modern CRM systems, notably Salesforce in the space so far. A lot of people will know of Salesforce for housing, and I've not met him personally, but Mark from Broadacres talks a lot about their journey with Salesforce, and there's a really sort of good a good amount of collateral online about people's success with such systems. So I think what we've seen alongside that journey is the appetite hasn't changed. People still want to be able to communicate to tenants about everything, and they want to do that in a data-driven manner. And ultimately, yeah, the legacy systems, and I guess the first three bullet points there, the legacy systems, the poor data quality, and the disparate systems, all I think are part of that system choice.
Yeah.
Where we work with housing associations now is not to implement a CRM such as HubSpot to replace a housing management system, but to layer on top and actually to use it as the aggregator in the middle, as the sort of data warehouse that takes all of this data and allows us to communicate accordingly. And I think later on in this presentation, we'll talk about some of those communication types.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think the way you positioned it at the talk quite nicely was when you referred to those legacy systems being a little bit kind of process, but also property-based focused versus sort of these days where it is customer interaction focused.
I think you get that from the acronyms. I think, you've got one subset of software provider that call themselves a housing management system, and you've got another acronym with a subset of systems that call themselves customer relationship management.
Yeah.
And I think the clue is in housing versus customer.
Yeah.
And I think what we need to ensure is that if we, I think housing management systems are almost focused on the stock first, and the tenants will look after themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas to an extent, an effective CRM strategy, in my opinion, puts tenants at the forefront and sort of puts tenant engagement and communications and happiness and awareness at the forefront. And, to an extent, the houses definitely won't look after themselves, but they shouldn't be the forefront of the selection criteria when it comes to a CRM system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that fourth bullet point on the screen there is lack of functionality or feasibility for the segmentation of it, which obviously feeds into unlocking the personalisation and sort of targeted approach. I think what we mean by that and what we hear quite a lot is that you'll have a centralised housing system with the customer data in, but if the communications team or customer experience or whoever need to run some sort of campaign, whether it be, from our perspective, it's usually helping to sort of run a campaign about a new portal or a new feature on a website, whatever it might be, they'll have to maybe export a list or export a bunch of customer data from that system, send it to maybe the BI team to sort of interrogate and maybe pull that into something like a MailChimp. There's usually some sort of issue around understanding if those people have opted into certain types of comms and things as well. So it's that lack of functionality or feasibility for data segmentation is also that point you're making before about technology choice as well.
And I think it's how far that typically when we work with housing associations, there is a limitation to level of segmentation. So, for example, we know that people live in this area. We know that this subset of people rent. We know that this subset of people have a shared ownership property. But, and I'm going to make a very specific example up, and it won't make commercial sense, but can you say, okay, show me tenants who live within an X mile radius of this area, who rent a property, who've logged less than 5 repairs in the last 2-year period, who gave us a customer satisfaction score of between 7 and 10, who have a pet and who have applied for mutual exchange. That scenario wouldn't need to exist. But the layering of rules to create real hyper-personalized lists effectively, to be able to communicate to those people very differently to a different subset of people, just doesn't exist in the systems that we see.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that kind of perfectly leads us on to that following point, really, which is that personalisation piece, which I think is critical when it comes to looking to drive tenant engagement, certainly from a digital point of view, because if you think about when we all receive various types of marketing emails every day or information from people trying to provide us things, even as customers or non-customers, I think everyone gets quite switched off quite quickly if it's something which you immediately see and think that's just not relevant to me in my scenario, essentially.
Yeah, I think we see a lot more personalisation in the Fulius side, and I think the reason I say that is because we work in our Fulius businesses in the commercial space outside of housing associations, and with that comes sort of a lot of different sales techniques that people use, and I probably get 20 outbound sales attempts a day, and I would say if we turn that into 100 a week, I ignore 98. The 2 that I end up reading or sometimes replying to will be when a sales rep's done some research. And if he or she finds me on Twitter, they'll find out I'm a Man United fan. If they find me on Twitter, they'll find out that I've, as a bit of a side hobby recently, been attempting to use AI to build a bit of a product, not product, but to tinker with AI to build something in a coding language called Ruby on Rails. And if somebody takes that insight about me and uses that insight in their outreach to me, I'm probably going to respond. And I know we're not selling to tenants and whatnot, but I'm using that as a scenario to say that if I'm a tenant of your housing association, don't talk to me as a tenant. Don't talk to me as a resident of a certain estate. Don't talk to me as a resident of a development. Talk to me as Paul. But that doesn't mean just use my first name in your email. It means take what you know about me and sort of take the intel that your system has or should have and personalize your communications to me with that information.
Yeah. And it's crucial, that particular element to the topic of today, isn't it, tenant engagement, because otherwise it's a way of making the customer feel like you don't understand who they are, what their preference is, and therefore they're probably going to not engage essentially off the back of that, I guess.
Definitely, and it's around contextual communications that are in line with the sort of stage of the journey that a tenant is at with your organization at the moment. So an example I use all the time, and I imagine 90% of people on this call have seen this, you've ordered a Domino's pizza before. And when you order a Domino's pizza, you get that wheel, and the wheel tells you, is it being baked? Is it being prepped? Is it being QA'd? Is it out for delivery? And I had a similar conversation with a CTO of a housing association recently about shared ownership. And when somebody has, got onto the property ladder for the first time, they've purchased a shared ownership property, they're really excited to move into this property, and they want to, they want the Instagram post of the first layer of bricks, and they want to go and take a photo of it, and they want to get the keys outside the door photo, and they're really excited about this journey. And what that turns into is, hey, any updates? Phone call, email, times 5,000 properties over a 1 year period. When if we can personalize our communications in an automated way, we prevent that. But we don't prevent it as in the person who's in the middle of that exciting journey loses out. We get ahead of it, and we keep them regularly informed, and we personalize our communications, A, to them as an individual, B, to them as somebody who is in the middle of purchasing a shared ownership property, and C, literally to the point of, hey, Jake, we know you're in the middle of purchasing this property. Guess what? We've broken ground today. We've started building your specific property.
Yeah.
And if we can get really, really hyper-personalized with personalization, engagement just increases massively and satisfaction increases massively.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a few things required, isn't there, to sort of unlock or enable that personalization. We touched upon data segmentation a little bit already, but I think that's obviously one of them. And I think that obviously it's on the screen here is the process of dividing customer data into meaningful groups based upon specific criteria. And I think your example before of being quite hyper specific with that of different areas is obviously key to it. But I think I'm referring back to a few workshops we ran earlier this year with a few housing associations talking about, even when they try to do this, forget the whole process of having to export the data or send it to someone to interrogate. Even just sort of finding the specifics of that particular group that you're looking to find really difficult. So even down to things like fields in the housing system being open text rather than specific categorized drop down. So if you're looking to find people who've reported a damp mold issue over a certain time period, it'd be a case of searching through the database for that keyword rather than being able to sort of segment it in a bit more of a reliable fashion.
And I think to achieve that, there's three parts of it really, and I haven't pre-prepared these three parts, so there might end up being four or two. But I think there's three parts, thinking out loud. And the first is, it's a company-wide initiative. It's not something that a system is going to, a system's suddenly going to ensure that individuals who take customer complaints on the phone or housing officers who visit properties, it's an all-in. Everybody is all hands to the pump. We need to make sure that we follow appropriate sort of procedures to ensure that we're collecting data in the appropriate way and logging it in the appropriate way.
Yeah.
I think the second is, well, it's probably switch them around. It's probably the first is that the system in the first place and the systems in use have to have the appropriate ability to collect such data and collect such data in the right manner. So as you say, text fields versus drop downs versus multi-selectors and whatnot. And there's a requirement to be able to house the data in the first place. But then I think the final method is ensuring all of that data gets into one single system for communications. So to your point earlier, we work with a lot of housing associations who their primary communications go out via their housing management system. But then when it comes to doing anything outside of that, there's sort of some rogue MailChimp licenses or some rogue, email marketing licenses here, there, and everywhere, and some spreadsheets that power it, and it's sort of a bit off grid. And it's, I spoke about this in the last time I was on a Hive. We work with a number of housing associations where we're solving shared ownership with HubSpot, and by that I mean we're handling communications, we're handling the process, we're handling automated comms that goes out based on rejection, acceptance, application process. So with that in mind, it's a HubSpot that we use is a very, very, very powerful communications tool. But when we use it as a communications tool, we leverage the CRM aspect to be able to use it as that central tool that does aggregate housing management data, call center data, telephony data, field management data, and pulls all that into that one warehouse so that we can use that system to do the heavy lifting, so to say, so that we can communicate in such a segmented and contextualized way.
Yeah, no, definitely, because I think part of it as well at the moment is that it has to go beyond just like a customer persona type now, doesn't it? Because there's so much focus on tenant voice and being able to sort of demonstrate you're acting upon that. I think it's more capturing preference in certain ways, whether that be communication methods, whether it be first language, or even obviously adding in things like customer persona and sort of tenure type and what have you. But I think it does need to be that level of specific. Maybe not.
Yeah, no, I think there's almost different types of preference, so to say, as well. So I think there's sort of explicit preference where somebody has said, when you communicate with me, I'd prefer to be communicated to in this language.
Yeah.
Where somebody says, when you communicate with me, I'd prefer it to be SMS. And then I would state that there's probably perceived preference, and preference may be the wrong word here, but there's perceived interest or perceived preference whereby, based on the data we hold about you, I guess first things, I'm talking about people that we know we are legally allowed to communicate to based on GDPR preferences, but assuming we can, based on the data we hold about you, we think you would be interested in this type of communication. So for example, I'm going back to shared ownership again, but if somebody has applied for a shared ownership property and not been successful in sort of being accepted and purchasing a shared ownership property, I would assume they're possibly interested in further shared ownership properties.
Yeah.
And then if they are interested in shared ownership properties, if they previously applied for a shared ownership property in Chester, I'm using Chester because it's easy, we're here, we probably shouldn't communicate to them about shared ownership properties in Southampton, because I imagine their preference would not be to up sticks and move a 4.5-hour drive away.
Yeah.
And we have that data. We have all of this data. I find that it just tends to sit in spreadsheets, and it tends, or little black books, or in sort of rogue databases that have been set up intra-departmentally. So yeah, I think number one, it's a sort of all hands to the pump company effort. Number two, your systems need to be able to do it, and then number three, I think you need to not get carried away with segmentation for segmentation's sake.
Yeah.
I think it's about identifying what does phase one of segmentation look like, and then you can iterate and adapt.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. And the next part of that, which I suppose is another element of being able to unlock the personalisation element, but more efficiently, is data segmentation we've just touched upon, but automation around it as well. And obviously there's various different sort of strands to automation, even from the Prodo group, I suppose. Obviously for us, a lot of the automation that we sort of help housing associations with is integrating with an internal system and presenting that customer interface, whether that be on an app or a portal or whatever that might be, to help the customer self-serve more, but also feedback things like status updates on an ASB report or a repairs report, and sort of the process of that, going back to that point before of people are looking to build that relationship of
Yeah.
trust, and that only comes with transparency. So for us, it's presenting the data back in certain ways, but I know you guys are working from a CRM point of view, from an automation perspective, which is more, I suppose, geared around certain triggers based upon database changes and interactions.
And I think there's a couple of different, I'd split them into two. There's almost transactional triggers, and then there is almost, I'm making this phrase up, so it might not be the best, but sort of behavioral triggers or data-led triggers. Probably behavioral triggers. So if we start with transactional triggers, again, to pick a sort of use case outside of the sector, if we look at DPD, or I think they've rebranded, haven't they, to who are DPD now?
Not sure.
Are they still DPD? I know it's the other one, Yodel, that rebranded, wasn't it? So if we look at DPD, you order a parcel, because an e-commerce brand is using DPD, you can order till 11 o'clock at night and it'll still get to you tomorrow. And the sort of the transactional triggers are, it's been picked, it's been sent to our warehouse, it's now in a van, Dave's going to deliver it, Dave's going to be with you between 11 and 1. 11 o'clock comes, Dave turns up and the package gets handed over to you. And before you even sat down and opened your package, you got an email from DPD saying your parcel was delivered. It's real automated transactional sort of comms. And I don't think housing associations don't typically have a problem with that type of communication for the main things. Someone pays their rent, thanks for paying your rent. Someone's logged a repair, thanks for logging a repair. But it sort of ends, in my opinion, at repairs and rent, really. We don't go any further. And as an example, again, I'm not intentionally bringing it back to shared ownership, but it's a very recent thing in my mind, and it's something we've done a lot of recently. There's a housing association we work with who, when they have a shared ownership property become available, as with, I imagine, many housing associations, there becomes tens, often hundreds, sometimes thousands of applications for one single property. Now, this particular housing association, before we started engaging with them, they had to, let's say there were 5,000 applicants for one property, and obviously only one applicant can move into said property. They had to manually reject and manually email 4,999 people. Now, don't get me wrong, they had something they copy and paste. They weren't typing an email from scratch, but they were sending 4,999 rejection emails by hand, effectively. And I question, how long does this take? And there's 2 or 3 people full time just handling comms on the progression of shared ownership. So by implementing a system, we're able to say, Jake, great news, you've been accepted. And because we've marked you as accepted, you go down an automated path as to, here's what's next, here's the documents we need, here's what we're going to do next. The other 4,999 go through a separate communications path, which is, on this occasion, we weren't able to accept you. Here's broadly some of the reasons why people get rejected. Here's what you can do to strengthen your application next time. Here's some other properties we have available. And that's all automatic. So, saving hundreds and hundreds of people hours. The second type is the behavioral triggers. So behavioral triggers are, again, to use the phrase sort of, we think you may be interested in sort of this type of communication strategy now. I think we may have just had a camera issue, but I'll carry on talking. We think you may be interested in this type of communications now because we've seen signs of this. So for example, things we've done in the past are, if somebody's portal usage decreases below, 20, 30% lower than average, we send them a sort of reactivation campaign, which reminds them of the benefits of the portal. If somebody who's always been a lifelong direct debit payer for rent cancels their direct debit and sets up a card transaction, a card onto adds a card to their portal, and that card happens to be a MasterCard or a credit card, that possibly tells us there may be early signs of sort of financial worries. And as such, we're able to trigger another campaign, which may talk about the ways we can help and whatnot. So I think, I would look at A, the transactional triggers that occur because something's happened, but B, the behavioral triggers that could also trigger automation because we've seen signs of a certain behavior type.
Yeah. When it comes to utilising certain elements of technology around this, obviously HubSpot is today's example of that. We'll come on to the surveying element in a second, but I think just thinking back to when you were talking then, it's another one of those classic cases, isn't it, that from our point of view, we talk about the repairs diagnostics process a lot and the sort of scheduling process a lot. There's lots of those internal processes which require different teams do certain things with various stages. There's a few examples we ran last year with workshops of associations when they have a particularly complex complaint or a complex payment or something along those lines. It sort of straddles maybe 2 to 4 teams, and there's different people getting involved at different stages. And again, that's back to that sort of legacy technology point, quite difficult to do. So yeah, we'll come to the surveying element in a second, which I know can be transactional as well. But what about from an internal process management point of view of enabling different teams to see inquiries or complaints, whatever it might be, up to certain stages?
And that's exactly why we use HubSpot as well. And again, if I talk about that shared ownership process we built, there's an internal sort of Kanban view as to the stages that an applicant goes through, but that includes triggering to a finance team. It includes triggering for sort of know your customer and credit checking. It includes triggering to compliance teams for various reasons. So it's a real, cross-departmental function. And it's something that we can, again, consolidate multiple spreadsheets, consolidate multiple databases, consolidate multiple ways of working into sort of one streamlined process that puts the tenant at the heart of it. Yeah,
great stuff. Okay. And then quite a lot of the people on today will be having to do more around customer surveying, around satisfaction. I suppose as a whole, and obviously the TSMs, their own sort of thing, which have their own sort of set of criteria and different channels to do so. But we're hearing more around when we're looking to build on our portal product and looking to gain feedback from clients and from friends in the space. A customer surveying element to capture sentiment and data from customers, be able to gain insight into repairs performance or whatever it might be, and there's certain elements around that as well from a transactional point of view.
And there's typically 3 survey types we tend to send out. So the first is what's called NPS, which stands for Net Promoter Score. So this is something we do completely automatically on a quarterly basis to all customers or all tenants. And what that basically does, it asks a simple question at the first day of every quarter, for example, to say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend, your housing association to your friends? And what it does, it's a known sort of it's an industry specific. It's a very widely known metric that basically people indicate between 1 and 10. The first sort of echelon of people are known as detractors. The sort of upper echelon of people are known as promoters, and the bit in the middle are your passives. And there's a calculation that basically gives you an NPS score. An NPS is scored from -100 to +100. World-class NPS is known as 75 positive. It's just a way of asking the same question every quarter, getting a score and seeing where you as housing associations are from a net promoter score perspective, and being able to continuously strive to increase net promoter score. Then we have 2 other survey types. We have what's called a CES, a customer effort survey, and a CSAT, a customer satisfaction survey. And basically the way they both work is one of them says, okay, we've just performed an action such as a repair. The tradesman has left the property, the door's been closed, he's got back into his van, he confirms that the repair has been complete, and automatically we trigger a survey straight away saying, how well did we handle your repair? And as you can see from sort of the example on the page right now, it's very simple: sad face, happy face, or indifferent face. And then we can trigger subsequent questions off the back of that. So we can say, on a scale of 1 to 5, was the work person tidy? Were they on time and whatnot? And we can ask those sort of questions. And then the final survey type is where we ask, in the event of an issue resolution, whether that's a complaint or a call, whatever it may be, how well did we handle that? And by asking all of that on an automatic basis, without anyone having to trigger surveys, just NPS going out every quarter, CSAT going out on every single complaint or resolution or issue, CES going out every single time a repair or a visit happens. The amount of data we can capture is incredible.
Yeah. And with all of those things, Dan, you kind of touched upon different types of surveying, but also we covered earlier around sort of that segmentation piece based upon preference and things, which obviously some of that can be driven by the surveying element. I think one thing that we hear is an issue around this. Housing associations will do a lot of surveying as it is. They'll have the internal database of customer information and property data, etc. And I think what we hear quite a lot of is that, yes, we're capturing survey data here. Yes, we're capturing preferences from tenants here. We've got a centralized customer database here, and there's interactions with 8x8 or telephony or live chat going on here. And bringing that sort of all together to formulate the insights which can feed into the segmentation is almost impossible in some ways, rather than sort of having that all tie together.
Unless you implement a tool like HubSpot, and that's what we do. And I think, if we take the tradesperson has just left the property story and we go with that one, and a survey gets sent out and they indicate it was 3 out of 5, and because it was 3 out of 5, we ask a few more questions. One of them is, did it turn up on time? Yep, 5 out of 5. Was the repair handled effectively? Yes, 5 out of 5. Was the house left tidy? No, 2 out of 5. We can even go as far as triggering, a small hamper of, a small box of chocolates, a box of tea, and a couple of cleaning products with a handwritten note that says, "We're sorry we let you down," all automatically through CRM.
Yeah.
And we can log all of this interaction in this single view. So we do that. We do that in March. That's the end of quarter. Well, I guess end of quarter 4 in housing association terms. Typically, we have an NPS survey that went out that quarter, and they scored, 40. We send this hamper automatically because we've not done the best possible job we could have from a repairs perspective. We send a subsequent NPS survey out the following quarter, and we see NPS climb to 80, world class.
Yeah.
And we can have all of this in this single view, every single interaction, every single touch point, but tying it back to the surveys to see, are the actions we're taking increasing engagement, increasing sentiment, increasing satisfaction?
Yeah. And I think that's almost talk about almost like a bit of a gold standard of approach, really, isn't it, to customer relationship management, CRM generally, really. But we've kind of covered few elements today, so I'm not sure if any key questions have come in for the Q&A phase. But
I think before we go on to Q&A, just on that gold standard as well, is a lot of software companies, NPS is their metric, and when we have a lot of very close relationships with people like HubSpot and Bracco, various other providers in the space, Google, Microsoft, and when we talk to them about their NPS and what they strive for, HubSpot's a really good example. HubSpot regularly score over 80 from an NPS perspective. When we talk to these companies about what does that mean, they see longer lifetime value of customers, so they see customers staying with them for longer. They see lower churn, less people leaving them. They see better cross-sell, better upsell, and they see better they see better engagement. Now, obviously, those metrics are very commercial and don't necessarily align themselves that well to housing associations. But if we try to align them to housing associations, we end up with happy tenants who stay in properties for longer. We end up with happy tenants who look after their properties in a heightened manner.
Yeah.
We end up with properties that are less properties that avoid. And all in all, I think it's a really good sort of North Star metric to how happy are our customer base.
Yeah, which feeds into a big element of how housing associations are measured at the moment, doesn't it? Which is obviously you've got the sort of financial viability and sort of everything that goes along with that, and compliance, but customer satisfaction being a huge one, and sort of a negative part of that would be housing ombudsman getting involved and all those sorts of things that sort of come with it, which everyone's very familiar with. But yeah, on that gold standard piece, then obviously we touched upon a few things, which personalisation being quite a core theme of it, but data segmentation and automation sort of feeding into being able to achieve personalisation. What would you say to someone who's nowhere near that gold standard and sort of needs to plan it? Would you start with the data?
Yeah, I think I was on a panel at the housing event with the chair of Ongo, and we were speaking about do something as opposed to nothing, or an almost sort of don't let perfect get in the way of good. And if there's no NPS surveys going out, no CSAT, no CES, no segmentation, that's fine. But let's not try and create a 2-3 year project involving every department in the business with a long RFP process and a long procurement process to get to that incredible gold standard. If there's nothing right now, let's strive for automated surveys and repairs. Once that's in place, let's move to automated surveys for complaints and whatnot. Let's, not try and bite off more than we can chew. So I guess my advice would be, what are the most think about what are the most impactful areas that we could address. Start small, start smaller with the software, smaller with the segmentation, and build it up thereafter.
Yeah. Makes total sense. And I think those examples you touched upon is something we've heard quite a lot. People starting with the likes of a complaints process and sort of looking to get that one right, and then building it from there.
Sure.
But no, really interesting. So thanks for that, Paul.
That's okay.
I don't know if anyone's popped any questions into the chat that you can see, Joe. I can't
yeah,
see
we've had a few questions and sort of responses. A couple around sort of how tenant comms preferences, how best to ascertain those preferences, and also a question from Rich asking if any organisations had any pushback from residents when you've not used their comms preference. And Matthew would come back on that to say that there is some ambiguity around preference, as we need to balance that with the needs of the business. So some tenants may state that their preference contact is email, but then if we need to contact them via something urgent such as arrears, then we will phone them.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think I think for us, where that sort of came from, that point was that it's a very good point, Matt, by the way, and thanks for engaging here as you always do. Is that quite often when we're running things like workshops or discovery sessions or scoping sessions with our client, being the housing association, I'm like, right, okay, to get the best out of this and to make sure that the output is informed by customer voice, let's get a bunch of tenants in the room, or let's invite tenants to somewhere to sort of work through this with them, and that might be obviously different purposes for different workshops and things. And quite often the approach that our client would take there is, right, we'll just send a blanket letter out to everybody who we might think might engage. And so I think the comms preference for us is sort of coming from that element. But you're right in that there is a balance between someone who might have a preference of a phone call in the middle of the night, as an extreme example, versus being able to sort of facilitate that. And that's kind of where they're capturing the preference and putting a appropriate measure in place, I suppose, feeds into it, I guess.
I think as well, so what we do a lot of with HubSpot is we integrate, we create a single source of truth for preferences, and we integrate into other systems. So something that can happen quite a lot in larger companies with sort of disparate systems is somebody updates their comms preferences in system 1 that doesn't tell system 2. And, as an example, a comms team have implemented MailChimp, somebody unsubscribes, but then another team doesn't have any integration of that unsubscription, and as such, they have indicated they want to unsubscribe, but it hasn't necessarily been passed on. And I think, the sort of rules around ICO and sort of the risk of fines with ICO and whatnot, I don't think that's necessarily, it's a mistake. It's not a huge issue that's going to cause a 4% of global turnover fine anytime soon, but it is poor and it is sloppy. And the way to address that is to have an integrated central system. So we do a lot of that with customers, where we consolidate preferences and we ensure that all systems talk to one another. And if somebody updates preferences in one area, it updates it across the entire business.
Yeah.
To the point around, sometimes we have to sort of ignore preference. Ignore is not the right word, but sometimes we have to ignore preferences because there's a transactional need, or there's a sort of business need to communicate in a different way. Hands up, I don't know the laws or sort of rules or regulations on, letters must be sent to those in arrears. But I guess without knowing that, my honest question would be, do you really need to send a letter? And do you really need to ignore comms preferences? And perhaps you do. I don't know if there's a regulatory reason you need to, or whatever. Or it's, but, I think about sometimes there are scenarios. There was a really good question asked on the panel by a lady whose name I forget, but she was the head of a domestic violence, domestic abuse charity. And she asked a question to the panel I was on around how we consider preferences for situations such as that. Now, we could be in a scenario where we send a letter to an individual in arrears that is in an unfortunate situation where there's domestic abuse in a relationship, and as such, that letter, there may be sort of an issue where a different individual in the household opens that letter and it causes more, domestic incidents. So I think my question back to anybody seeing that would be to question the business and understand, do we really have to ignore comms preferences for this particular scenario. Arrears, you may have to, but
Yeah.
I think I'd challenge it, and I think I'd question, I would also question the success of arrears collection when communicating in someone's chosen comms preference versus not.
Yeah.
And again, I imagine it's not something that's reported upon and the data's analysed, but I imagine if you have a subset of tenants who want to be communicated with on WhatsApp, I would imagine you'll get probably better arrears collection speaking to those tenants on WhatsApp than you will sending a letter.
Yeah.
I think based off what Matthew's just dropped in the chat, that it is legally a requirement to send letters when it comes to arrears, but obviously
everything I just said then. But you apply that to other scenarios outside of arrears, but for sure.
It's a really good point though when you put it in the context of where there might be a domestic abuse situation. It's possibly something that needs to be reviewed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think there was part of that question, Joe, maybe from Matt or Rich or somebody else that touched upon how do you go about capturing this customer preference? And I think for us, we're getting asked quite a lot at the moment on our clients' portals to build out the My Profile area for that sort of purpose. So historically, it's been let's present their name and date of birth, those sorts of things, let them reset their passwords, and maybe pull through things like local housing officer or rent arrears officer or whatever, household members. People are asking us to do more so now, add those fields in to capture things like comms preferences or preferred appointment slots or first language choices, and bring things even through such as EDI data and let people sort of update that as well. Because I think when it comes to that segmentation piece you were talking about before, it can only be as effective as the quality of data that you're segmenting. So I think that proactive data management using something like the front end portal is a way of helping with that, I guess.
I think it's about removing barriers to receiving comms preferences as well. So, I think our customer portal product is really good, but I think everybody interacts very differently with technology. There are subsets of tenants who, they may be elderly, they may be sort of digitally excluded, and there may be people that don't necessarily have, an appropriate smartphone for an app or whatever it may be. And I think there are other things that we can do, and we're in the middle of developing this with our portal at the moment, where perhaps we can send a blanket SMS to every single tenant to say, hey, we're trying to understand how best to communicate with you. It would be really helpful if we knew your communication preference. If you would like to be communicated to by letter, reply with 1. If you'd like to be telephone, reply with 2. And we can taking that data as the 10% of the challenge. The other 90% is then how do we interpret the 1, the 2, the 3, push it into the relevant system and update comms preferences across the board. And that's where we as a company do that with integrations with HubSpot and other such systems.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rich just actually raised a really good point to say that obviously the next part of this is the reminder that once that data is collected, for everyone to check every 6 months. So obviously once it's been collected, needs to make sure that it's up to date. Rich is saying, what percentage of contact preferences do people have? They're just over 50%. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Rich. I know we're coming close to the end of the session, but
if you have, Rich, feel free. That'd be interesting to know.
Or if anyone in the chat knows I don't. If anyone in the chat knows their percentage, just pop them into the chat, and might be interesting to see what comes back.
Yeah. Rich was just saying that they're aiming for 70% by the end of September. Okay. So they're just over 50% now. So
nice.
That's good to know. Interesting.
I think I'm going to put Rich on the spot here and suggest that he may have just accidentally volunteered to come on a session with you and talk about the journey on getting to 50% and how they plan to get to 70.
Absolutely that, yeah. Thanks for that, Rich. Brilliant. Okay. Go on, Joe.
It's okay. Rich is just doing this.
Okay, great stuff. That kind of feeds on quite nicely to the next session, to be honest, which we've got a little break now. So it is going to be the 29th of August at 11 o'clock in the morning, which is a Thursday as always. But what we're going to be covering on there is the power of customer-led digital design and social housing. And we've got our product owner, Tom, joining us, who's sort of accountable for gaining feedback from clients and everyone else in the space and sort of positioning our product development roadmap around it. But also one of our recent clients, Sarah Shorrock, who is digital transformation lead at Stepping Stone Project. So they're Rochdale based, and their service is essentially temporary accommodation for vulnerable people, homeless people, and sort of helping them get them back on their feet, essentially, hence the name Stepping Stone. And what we've had to do with Stepping Stone around their portal is certain adjustments to certain elements of authentication and registration and a few other bits and bobs around it to make sure that it's as accessible and usable as possible for the types of people that they look after, which again feeds into today's topic quite nicely as well, around capturing preference and acting upon it. So looking forward to that one. That will be end of August, so feel free to join us there. And then by the sounds of it, the next one in September will be us again, Rich, talking about your journey to driving that customer preference data up. So yeah, unless there's any other queries or anything final from you, Paul?
No. Thank you, everybody.
Just a final
Great
one
stuff.
from Valentina is just asking
Jo.
and saying that she would be curious to know about how other HAs have gone through their EDI data collection exercise in light of consumer standards. That was the final question.
Yeah, that was a good question. And I think from our perspective, obviously working with many housing associations with the likes of web products, but also the portals and the apps, is that element that we touched on earlier around building out that aspect of the data capture element of the app as well, to capture EDI and pull through current EDI information from an internal system, but enable the customer to update it as well. But no, if anyone's got any further information on that from their housing association and wants to connect on and sort of discuss that or loop us into that'd be great as well. That's what Housing Hive's here for. Brilliant. Okay. Well, yeah, thanks very much for everyone's time today. It was great to hear you guys sort of input into that towards the end there as well, and ask those questions and sort of discuss things between yourselves. As I say, it's kind of one of the reasons why we set this up and use our position of having many connections in the space to bring people together to discuss those challenges. So thank you for that, and thank you for your input, Paul, as well, from a Fulius, HubSpot, and CRM point of view.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great stuff. Well, thank you very much, guys, and we'll see you on the next one, hopefully at the end of August.
See you soon, everybody. Bye-bye.